Hi, everyone. Today, I am very glad to introduce you our paper, Original or Translated, a causal analysis of the impact of translationese on machine translation performance. This is a NAACL 2022 oral paper by Jingwei, Zhijing, Markus Freitag, Mrinmaya Sachan, and Bernhard Schoelkopf. We're motivated by a frequent question asked in machine learning: how does X affect the performance Y? And in many cases, people are not only interested in a correlational conclusion, but also a causal conclusion, so that the insight can be transferable across different settings and conditions. So an instantiation of this question in the context of machine translation is: how does translationese affect MT performance? In our paper, we try to address this question in a causal way. There are three aspects that we will cover in the talk. First, what is translationese? Second, why does it matter to MT? Third, how, namely the causal effect. So translationese is an artifact that usually happens in human translation process. So normally, given a certain language pair, we make the example of German and English here. There are two ways to collect the data. One is to collect original German data and then human translations into English. The other way is original English and translations into German. So we use the star to represent the translated text, which is translationese here. So an observation is that translationese tend to be simpler and more verbose. So to prepare for our study, we collected a causal MT dataset, which consists of 5 language pairs. And in each of the pair, there are labels of the human translation direction for each of the subsets within the language pair. And with this data, we also statistically verified that translationese tend to be more verbose and simpler in terms of vocabulary size. Why does translationese matter to MT performance? A standard supervised training setting for MT is that we have a training set including translation pairs of the 2 languages. We feed it to a model. Throughout the slides, we will use the German to English translation model. We feed it to a model, train it, and then test the model on translation pairs of the same language. And the previous work on translationese proposes that the translationese in the test set actually influences the machine translation performance. So basically they break the test set into 2 halves. First is German origin and translated English text. And then the other half is the text where German is the translated text and English is the original text. What they do is that they evaluate the same model on the 2 subsets of the test set and report performance 1, performance 2. Some of the papers argue that for performance 2, it's actually inflated because the input of this test set is too simple as it's translationese. Some other papers argue that the performance 1 is inflated because the output of this subset is too simple, so that it's easy to score high in the blue score. So there are variants in how previous paper reports this translationese effect. And our idea is that maybe just the translationese in the test set is not a sufficient explanation for MT performance. So our research answers the question, apart from the real translation quality that decides the MT performance, and apart from the previous studies, analyze the effect of, analyze the correlation of translationese in the test set and the MT performance. Could we explain the variance in previous studies report of this vector by adding some additional vectors into concern? So one of the possible factors that we tried is breaking down the training set. So analogous to the test set breakdown, the training set could also have these 2 different subsets. When they're fed to the model, it could also be possible that the train test direction match affects whether the performance 1 on test set 1 or performance 2 on test set 2 is higher or lower. So we conduct experiments such as using aligned train and test sets, get performance of 33 in the context of German to English translation. And then we then change that training set to the opposite subset. The performance dropped to 24%. We also tried a similar analysis on the second test set, where the original performance, if the train and test are aligned, is 35, and it drops to 27 when it's unaligned. Now back to this question, we would say that this new factor, train test direction match, also is an explanation of how translationese affects MT performance. And then we wonder whether there could be an additional factor here, which we are inspired by a 2021 EMNLP paper, where we propose that causal direction of data collection matters, and introduce the vocabulary of causal learning and anti-causal learning. Where causal learning means that if we treat the data set collection as if we think about the data set collection direction, it might be the same as the model direction, or it might be the opposite. When it's the same, it's causal. When it's opposite, then it's anti-causal. So here we would group the training and test set direction as a whole to represent the data collection direction. And then inspect the phenomenon whether the model direction is the same, like as illustrated here. They are when they're in the same color, then it's causal learning. When they're through different colors, then it's anti-causal learning. So with this whole, with this entire causal graph, we look into what are the effects of the two additional factors that we identified, train test direction match and data model direction match, to see whether this can provide an explanation on the different reports previously on how translationese affect MT performance. So in our paper, we answered two sub-questions. The first is, how does the train test direction match affect MT performance? To answer this, actually, direct intervention is sufficient to get a causal conclusion. And the other question is, how does the data model direction match affect MT performance? To answer that, we actually have some confounders that we need to adjust for. So the causal analysis to answer this question is more complicated, and we will introduce in the following. So first, for question 1, where direct intervention is a valid causal method, we basically intervene on the train set alignment by fix a training set size, such as 200, and then change the portion of subset 1 and subset 2 by alpha. And then when we change these, we report results. When we fix a test set, then the more aligned the test set is with the training set in general, the higher the blue score is. This is the same trend for the other test set as well. We validated it on all 4 language pairs. We also provided a possible explanation of why self-training and back translation in previous papers have been reported to have different effects on different parts of the test set. So our hypothesis here is that ST and BT basically generates pseudo-parallel data. And when that machine translation needs is aligned with a test set, that gives additional performance boost. So for more details, you can check the paper. The other sub-question we try to answer is, how do we control for the confounders? So the basic constraint here is that although we want to analyze the data model direction match, how does that affect the MT performance? Usually, if we get naturally generated translation corpus, it's often the case that, for example, for English-German, German original language are usually about events related to German-speaking places. And it's the same for English-speaking, like English original corpora as well. which will mean that their distribution of content will be different. And also due to language habits in different languages, the sentence length might also be different. So how can we look into the effect of our interested variable, its direct effect on machine translation performance, by accounting for unwanted correlations through backdoor paths, as noted in due calculus of Julia Pohl. And in this case, the backdoor path goes through sentence length and content. What we do is that we try to get the average causal effect of the expectation of the machine translation performance score when the direction match is 1 versus when the direction match is 0. We try to get this due intervention of the average causal effect by backdoor adjustment, where we use due calculus to account for a set of variables that fits the backdoor criterion, basically the sentence length and the confounder here. We adjust for them by integrating over all possible values of them, and then compare the difference when m equals 1 versus m equals 0 by varying all possible z here. So how do we integrate over this z? We do it by text matching. So we match the distribution of content and sentence lengths to be similar across the two human translation directions. And then we plot the aligned distributions here as well. Here are also some examples of how aligned the corpus are after matching. And an example causal effect size we found is that you can find all the results in our paper. Some example we show here is that for English to German translation, if we use causal learning after controlling for all the covariates, the causal learning has a direct causal effect of 3.13 compared to if on the same data, like if people switch to anti-causal learning with the same distribution of sentence length and content. To conclude, the contribution of paper are in 4 ways. First, we identify 3 important ways that translationese affect MT performance. Second, we collect causal MT, a data set with direction-specific training and test sets across 5 language pairs. Third, we estimated the causal effect size of trained test direction match via direct intervention and data model direction match via backdoor adjustment across 5 language pairs. Fourth, our experimental results can provide insights to future MT practice, including how to adjust for results involving translationese. Thank you very much for your attention. You can also retrieve the slides on my personal webpage.